Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining another episode of EMTB. Today, we're talking about BR, specifically how it pertains to empathy. And I am joined by Emily and Manyata. Hello, guys. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Very well, yes.
And when you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves, so people will know who you are. So, Emily.
Certainly. Emily Taylor. I'm at IDC, specifically IDC in Canada. I cover augmented reality and virtual reality, among other things, at IDC in Canada. I do cover it specifically from a Canadian perspective, but obviously there's some worldwide trends that we're seeing as well that reflect into this space that I'm happy to chat about today. The work I do at IDC helps really, for the most part, quantify the market for devices and hardware, software and services spending. I look at headsets here and all those pieces that enable use cases across augmented reality and virtual reality. So what I can bring to the table in this conversation is a perspective about the market as a whole, the devices within that market, and really where things are evolving.
Thank you.
Okay.
Manyata, yeah?
Yes. Hi, I'm Manyata, and I'm from India. Currently, I'm not working in the space of virtual reality anymore, but in 2016, from 2016 to 2017, I spent a year doing research in this space because I was really drawn to how I could possibly use virtual reality in the space of education, specifically education for children from low-income backgrounds in India, because that's an area of interest for me, and that's where I'm working. So I conducted a pilot study. I did a project for a couple of months to test it out. I did research. We researched the kind of content available that can be used in a classroom environment. I also then conducted a pilot study for a day at a school close by and got a lot of insights from that. So I'd be happy to share what I learned there. Right now, I am working in the space, in the low-income space, in the education space itself, but currently working with parents of low-income communities with an organization called the Miraki Foundation.
Very cool. And that's so low-income in education with the BR?
Yes, that was what I had planned to do. That was the project that I had looked at last year.
Cool. Well, I know we're gonna have an interesting conversation. So, so what do you guys think about VR as this idea of an empathy machine? Do you guys believe it's true? I mean, are there obstacles to it? Where are we in that context?
So definitely for me, I see a lot of potential in virtual reality as a technology, VR as a technology. And I definitely see the potential I see potential in VR to act as an empathy machine. But I have also read critiques about it because currently I think even though it's a technology that completely immerses the user in another environment, and so you almost feel like you're in that environment, I feel like there's still a lack of interactivity, which is not available all the time for every experience. And I think that lack somehow distances the user from what is actually happening in the environment. So while it creates a great understanding and it can create relatability, I'm not sure if it really creates empathy at this point for me.
So when you say lack of interactivity, does it have to do with the using of the hands, the using of being able to touch things or simulate the touching of things?
No, I think that does happen because with the high-end VR experiences like Oculus Rift, I think you are able to do that. However, I think what I mean is, I feel with empathy, I associate emotion, some level of emotion with empathy, something inside you that is what we call empathy. For me, that's what empathy is. And I think that right now that somewhere is a little missing because I still feel like a user is immersed in an environment, yet not a part of the environment necessarily for me.
Interesting.
Right. I think It's interesting because I think from the industry perspective, we've probably seen more hype around augmented reality over the past few years or so when compared to virtual reality. And that's really about changing the way organizations deliver data, both internally and externally, superimposing data onto the real world and facilitating changes in the way organizations actually design their products and services by this visualization in the real world. So it's interesting to have this conversation today about virtual reality and empathy and how VR can make us care about other groups or other situations that need our help, this idea of empathy. I think there's this idea of empathy. Empathy is certainly an element of a mindset, and a mindset can't necessarily be forced, but it's a mindset that can be influenced by tools. And obviously skills are required to be able to use these tools in a meaningful way. So being able to create a feeling of empathy can be done using the tools that VR provides. But whoever is curating that experience needs to have obviously have certain skills to be able to curate it so it engages someone. And we have definitely seen companies and organizations do this over the last few years. It seems likely that a user will learn more by experiencing a simulation than looking at pictures or watching a film. That's what makes VR such a powerful tool. So there's a lot of pieces here, but there's some dependence on who the creator of it, who might have their own agenda or bias that can influence that experience. Mm-hmm. And there are some pieces that can't be simulated. Sound, touch to some extent. Mm-hmm. So touch has come a long way with controllers, to your point. That's for sure. But what about getting an actual feeling, simulating anxiety, fear, or anger? Mm-hmm. These feelings can take more than a simple simulation to develop, and they often develop over time as well, right? Yeah. So a VR experience can't necessarily mimic a feeling that will evoke meaningful empathy, but it's a tool that can help assist, from my perspective.
Definitely, yeah.
And so this has to do more with content, the type of content, and how it's presented to the user. Is that like an obstacle?
That seems like a piece of the puzzle for this, sure. Because when we start thinking about VR experiences and what the actual outcome is, what the creator or what they're trying to achieve. It has its own element of bias in it, and that can influence the experience. But when we talk about this idea of principles of influence, we definitely have to start thinking about things about enabling purchase decisions using VR, and that's evoking that idea of I need that or I want that too. It opens that angle as well, enabling things beyond empathy, but enabling the idea of wanting to purchase something or buy something. So it's all part of that conversation with this principle of influence.
What industries or use cases have you seen where like the gap from getting to empathy is closer, or there's more progress being made or no progress being made?
That's a good question. We've definitely seen some interesting use cases, I think, across healthcare. Certainly this element of using virtual reality to enable or dissipate phobias is something that has definitely come up in some of the use cases that I have seen. That's something where I think that it's being used particularly well. There's other obviously use cases as well, and we've seen a lot of this with respect to, and it's not necessarily evoking empathy, but it's this idea of training and simulation in the enterprise as well. Yeah. So yeah, and I think that that's definitely a piece that it's an area that is over-indexing. I would say it's important to for businesses to show an employee who's in training or needs to be reskilled, to show them how the experience works before putting them actually in it, and actually saves time and money for the industry as well. So there's several areas. Healthcare, we're definitely seeing training and simulation across numerous industries, seeing things like using virtual reality for property tours. You can see the property before actually purchasing it. That's really helpful if you're buying remotely, those sorts of things. So there's some really interesting examples that we have seen, not necessarily relating all to empathy, but again, it's this idea of influencing or that immersive experience.
Yeah.
I mean, there was also that famous New York Times ad, right, about Syrian refugees. around VR.
With the New York example?
Sorry?
Yeah, I couldn't understand what you said.
I said there was also one very famous New York Times ad, right? Where they gave those VR headsets with the paper, and you had to download an app. And I think that was an attempt to create awareness and one step towards empathy to what was happening to the Syrian refugees, or the life in their day, day in their life. Sorry.
Yeah, we were talking about that one before the call. So I'm in California, I'm in California. So USC has USC, the university here, the Annenberg School of Journalism.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the instructors, or one of the teachers there is huge on VR, and I believe they're the one leading that parade in terms of using VR in journalism for the purpose of getting the reader to, particularly with these types of examples of like the Syria thing, to care more about this type of situations. I haven't used it, so I cannot speak from experience. I do know people who have used it, and their feedback to me was, I mean, it's really cool. You can see all this stuff. You actually feel like you're walking there.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, to the point where I'm feeling like I gotta go over there and do something about it. I didn't get there.
Yeah.
I got the feeling, but I never got the jolt to actually jump on a plane, go over there, and do something. So that's kind of like the perspective from empathy standpoint. Now I'm interested in your opinion in terms of education.
Mm-hmm.
So when you speak about VR in education, does this mean that the topics become immersive for the students?
Yeah. So the idea was, so if I just give a little background about myself, it'll make more sense. So for 2 years, I taught. I was part of the Teach for India Fellowship. This comes under the Teach for All America. So there's also a Teach for Teach for All umbrella. I think there's also a Teach for America. You might have heard of it. So I was part of Teach for India. For 2 years, I was placed in a government school, public school in Delhi. And I was teaching second graders, girls. And these were all children who came from low-income communities around the area where I was teaching. And so that's where the idea to use VR, I mean, when I came across VR, I immediately thought of that classroom of mine, and I thought of how maybe creating immersive experiences that VR could create would make learning and just the process of learning more relatable and more fun for these kids, because they have really never experienced any exposure beyond their homes and their communities. And the maximum they go is their school, which is about maybe 2 to 3 miles away from home. So for me, that was the interesting aspect. I mean, how could I make very alien topics that they learn more relatable to them by giving them an experience or making them feel as though they are there? So it just becomes something that they are, I mean, it just gives context to learning in a way. So that was what I was wanting to try to do.
Awesome. Awesome. And have you seen that implemented in, let's say, let's say universities have resources to put more money into it, to do just basically, because you're working with low income context, right? So have you seen it implemented in where people have more access to this technology?
No, so actually not here right now. I'm not very aware of it in a classroom scenario. I do know that people have started using it at an individual level. So in households, people have VR headsets and they are using it to play video games or possibly even see some educational content. But those are, again, people who would be able to afford the VR headset and afford those phones. But no, I haven't heard of it in a classroom scenario in a school in India. But while I was doing my research, I came across Google Expeditions, which I'm sure Emily would know about. Yeah, so which is made for classrooms. And I know that that's something they were testing out and implementing in classrooms in different parts of the world. So in fact, for my study as well, because there wasn't really any classroom content available, I did use some content from Google Expeditions itself to test it out. So yeah, it was a test, but I don't think it's being implemented anywhere in India right now in a school per se.
So what do you think about? Wouldn't it be cool, because we were talking about this before? Is, you know, how there's this bunch of these VR arcade now, you know, popping up where you can just walk in and basically it's a VR arcade and just put in a headset and start playing whatever. If it were like a VR library for education purpose, right? So you walk into a library now, you pick up a book. Now it's the opposite. You go into a VR library and you pick up a book, but in your VR thing, and then you start experiencing the content of it. That would be cool.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting idea. I mean, I had also thought about that at that time. It's that rather than taking it to schools, let's create a VR lab outside of schools and invite children to come there to experience the content. I, however, think that if I think about it from the Indian perspective or the Indian subcontinent's perspective, I think that the biggest challenge would be accessibility. Because again, the sector I look at, or the sector I'm interested in, which is the low-income sector, because that's where I feel the value can be maximum. I don't know how accessible it would be or how affordable it would be for them if it's in the form of a VR library where they need to go and possibly potentially pay for this service. Because I mean, it's not cheap, right? So
yeah.
that would be my only question when it comes to my area of interest. But definitely for people who could afford it, it's a very, very good idea to explore.
So Emily, and what we were saying about you know, challenges. One of the challenges is that one accessibility, also the pricing.
Yeah.
You were talking about before we got on live. Is you know, the industry that's kind of like you should watch is gaming.
Yeah.
How do you see that transferring over to the mainstream from the perspective of gaming?
Well, we're definitely seeing that for virtual reality, consumers represent probably a pretty significant percentage of hardware purchases. So there are a lot of gamers out there, and that's arguably bringing VR to the mainstream. And I also think as it becomes more mainstream and moves away a little bit from that gamer realm, and to be fair, that gaming experience, I think, is really shaping how VR will push out into the rest of the world. A lot of innovation is happening there. But as more consumers who aren't gamers and more employees that aren't gamers are exposed to VR, good experiences are pretty important. And I think this has changed over the last few years. Bad experiences can really inhibit the market. Going back a few years now, my first VR experience was a roller coaster ride, sort of a 360-degree video. Is that the best way to be exposed to this technology? I'm not sure that it is, right? But we've all kind of had those experiences with VR. But if we do want to bring it more mainstream, then that's probably, the experience does have to get a little bit better. I do think there can be some reluctance to wear headsets, especially for longer periods of time. They can be quite heavy. And again, that is changing. We're getting slimmer, more standalone. But some individuals also, and it's a smaller group, might face nausea or spatial discomfort, I think, as well during the usage. So motion within the applications, you know, to keep it, again, more mainstream, you know, generally kept to a minimum. Some people might not even be able to participate. And we also are seeing that many of the devices that are in the market right now are tethered, so they're wired to a computer. For example. So that can also inhibit the experience a little bit. I talked a little bit about weight already. A colleague of mine a few years ago made the reference that it was like wearing a toaster on his face, which I thought was an interesting way to put it. But overall, I'd say the devices in the market are really improving over time, and the industry is making it easier and less onerous for users and making it a better experience overall. But also, when we start thinking about VR, we have to show that this new way of doing things, this new way of showing content can't inhibit health, safety, or performance. There's an element of return on investment here in the sense that, you know, we're already doing things a certain way. How is this better now than what we were doing before? So there's proving that, I think, as well. And certainly, I mean, if we start to look at device types in the market, we're definitely seeing a shift towards, as I was saying, higher quality, untethered experiences. Thinking about VR today, devices like Samsung's Gear VR, I think, come to mind. That's one of the more, simpler devices. A smartphone is inserted into the headset and powers the experience. We're starting to see that shift towards standalone devices that don't need a smartphone. Tethered VR devices are launching at very reasonable price points, like the Windows mixed reality headsets and devices like Oculus Go. Tethered headsets, there are some physical limitations due to the tethering piece, but it does provide a more optimized experience because the device is powered by that companion device. So the market is really, it's changing very rapidly over time and shifting arguably a little bit away from gamers, but some of those pieces do need to be a bit resolved, I think, before it can really be brought to the mainstream. There's definitely a perception that VR is for gamers that we need to evolve away from.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because when I conducted the study in a school with kids, that was one of the biggest challenges what you're talking about, quality of experience. Because we were trying to go with more affordable headsets, so not the very expensive ones, the quality was something we kind of compromised on. And that caused issues like Emily just highlighted. There was headaches, there was motion sickness, and this was feedback from the children that we worked with. Personally, I get motion sickness, I get nausea when I wear a VR headset. It doesn't work for me. So
there's definitely those challenges. So that we have to keep motion to a minimum, but then how can you have that fully immersive experience? It's going to help drive things like empathy or whatever the content is driving the user towards.
Absolutely.
Yeah, bit of a challenge.
How do you guys see the integration of AR and VR in terms of like mixed reality moving forward in terms of enhancing the experience?
It's interesting when we talk about mixed reality. So at IDC, I mean, taxonomy and definitions are so important to us at IDC because they help us understand what falls within a market and what falls outside of that market. So we have defined virtual reality in a certain way, and we've defined augmented reality in a certain way. Virtual reality is this idea, of course, of placing end users into a completely new reality, and it obscures their view of the surrounding world, real world environment, because it's a headset covering eyes. Augmented reality, it overlays that digital information. So you can see, obviously, the surroundings as well as the augmented reality content. Mixed reality is, and if we can take a sec to talk about it, IDC's perspective at this point is that it's arguably confusing the industry a little bit as it is. It makes it harder for everyone to understand what actually is on offer in virtual reality and augmented reality. We've seen Microsoft call their devices Windows mixed reality devices, but within our taxonomy, those devices are virtual reality devices.
Okay.
So that it's a bit of a nuance there. We've definitely seen the industry as a whole talk about mixed reality, and there's a train of thought that this more immersive augmented reality, which includes this ability to manipulate holograms in space rather than a basic, heads up display type device. There's an argument that that's mixed reality, but that's arguably still augmented reality. So that delineation in our taxonomy we're not making at this point. It's either AR or it's VR. A rather lengthy response to probably a very simple question, but I think that that's where I'm landing on sort of that spectrum between augmented reality and virtual reality and mixed reality.
Okay. Yeah, I was my perspective follows what you guys are saying. I thought it was very confusing, but I think it has to do more with people just wanted to latch on to different categories and say they're leading that parade, but at the same time, when you dig deeper, it is what you're talking about.
Either augmented reality or it's virtual reality. From our taxonomy perspective, certainly.
Yeah, and from the perspective of moving forward, how far away do you guys think we're from being? I mean, you kind of talk about the different obstacles there are to experience a true VR experience. I mean, I don't even know what a true VR experience is. I don't think none of us know. We have some ideas. I mean, we can walk around the city and be in VR, and maybe it's that, right? Maybe. I mean, instead of jumping on Fortnite, we'll be doing it through VR. I mean, I don't know. I mean, But how do you guys see this evolving over the next few years, where it's not, you overcome the perception that it's only for gaming, and it becomes this thing where it's kind of like using the laptop or using the phone.
So for me, I think, I mean, I would follow up from what Emily said. I don't think it's completely only limited to gaming. I do think that the perception is that it has started going into sectors other than gaming. Like she had highlighted that there's healthcare and there's training. And I feel even with Google trying different things out, it's slightly tried to even enter the space of education. So I definitely see that happening. But then again, the challenges are many, like as have been highlighted earlier, in terms of quality of experience, in terms of accessibility, in terms of general even quality of the equipment, and then affordability, right? So I think that those questions still need to be answered. And I think slowly people are trying to develop things of better quality. Like we already know there are headsets of better quality that are being developed. And now people are trying to solve the problem of bulkiness by making slimmer headsets, or by making standalone headsets. You don't have the problem of having a phone and a charger at hand. So I think there are developments being made, but I still think that there are major obstacles. And I mean, I'm sure Emily would know more about how many developments have been made.
I think it's definitely tying it back to practical experiences. I think that's a big piece of driving this forward. I think in the enterprise, I mean, as we were saying, we're definitely seeing great opportunity for things like product design and retail showcasing, customer service, employee training, all those great things we just talked about over the next 5 years, say for virtual reality. But when we start thinking about it for things like empathy, that's where it's targeted maybe a little bit more to consumers, I would argue. We definitely are seeing, and this is from a Canadian perspective, to be fair, in our research, that the majority of consumers, they pretty much know what VR is. AR probably has a little bit more of an awareness issue. We understand that it's, the perceptions that it's focused on gamers. But when we start to dig a little further, peel the layers of the onion back a little bit, we've seen in our Canadian research that for consumers that actually are familiar with what VR is, that experiences that provide immersive learning appear to be of particular interest to them. We've asked about a whole bunch of other things, sports being one of them, social experiences being another, but we really saw this area of, to be fair, educational experiences over-indexing. It seems for those who know what VR is, that are familiar with VR, that seems to be a particular interest. They understand the value that VR could bring to that type of experience. I also think that there's something to be said in this piece about social experience, and I'd be curious to see what the team here thinks. VR right now arguably is a bit of an isolating experience. You're behind your own headset. You're behind a specific platform. I know that there are industry evolutions trying to break these pieces down with avatars and those sorts of things where you can have a more social VR experience. But to make that social experience easier, and especially as we start thinking about something like empathy, that experience could be more significant by sharing it with someone else to help process it, relate to it, discuss it, and those sorts of things. And I think that is across consumers, employees, and with all types of experience, arguably even beyond empathy-based experiences in VR as well. So I think there's a social element that also we could try and tackle in a more meaningful way. And I do think, again, there's evolutions happening to tackle that, but having a social VR experience can also make the experience more powerful as is, because there's someone to share it with and process it with and talk about it with.
Very interesting.
So I was thinking of, when you talk about the social part, it's kind of like these. I'm gonna bring up the name again, Fortnite. It's kind of like latest trend right now. People are in there for, it's fun and all this other stuff. It's colorful, but it also has this component, or at least what I talk about to people about, is the component of having to do something within it. Like there's a goal. I mean, you're shooting other people, but I mean, whatever. You can take that. You can take that. Just put something in there that's not shooting other people. and use it for something else. And I think you have a social component of, in my perspective, it's more about building. What are you building in VR with other people to then kind of celebrate it? I know you're building a house, you're building, I don't know, something, a school, or you building, what are you building? You know, kind of like the Second Life thing. And I think that's when it comes to, well, at least from my perspective, I would like to see something like that. I know I would be hooked on that. When you start building a city, you know, with your friends, or not even your friends, I mean, new friends from around the world. Next thing you know, you have a, you know, virtual city and a virtual town, a virtual neighborhood, and a virtual, you know, everything. And people, I mean, I had this conversation with a friend about 3 years ago, and we were talking about kind of like the things that we have to watch out when talking about VR. And one of them was, does it become too addictive, and people start living more there than they start living in the real world. You know, kind of like the Matrix from the movie the Matrix angle, where you become more addicted to it. Do you guys have an opinion on that?
I don't know. I mean, for me, I see where you're going with that. And I think that's a very interesting thought of actually building something. And that brings in Emily's idea of making it a more social platform. But for me right now, I think the topmost priority would be the quality of experience, because personally, I don't think I can get completely immersed and lost in that world if I'm not comfortable in the experience. And if all I want to do is take that headset off my head. And that's what happens to me. So I'm thinking from a very personal perspective here that for me, I think I will never lose touch to reality if the quality of experience remains what it is right now, because I can't wait to take the headset off when I put it on, because it really makes me feel sick. So for me, that's okay. The topmost. I think when that happens, even now with video games that are not on virtual reality, in India, we have Xbox and different kinds. I'm not very good with video games, but I feel like right now those games, because of the comfort level and even the social aspect they provide, people do get lost in them and lose touch to reality, because the quality of the experience is such for them, and it's a space that is comfortable for them to be in. So I definitely think if that happens, VR could possibly be what you're saying. It could happen potentially.
Yeah, there are those pieces certainly to overcome. But frankly, I love that idea of being able to build something in virtual reality in a meaningful way with people who are on the same team and wanting to have the same outcome. And I think that that's really where things could start to become more meaningful. And you can engage people in that way too. And it's not so isolating. It's you're building something meaningful with your friends or your colleagues. And I think that the enterprise side is trying to tap into that too. We definitely have this idea of virtual collaboration spaces that allow workers to interact and improve productivity. And that really is all about collaboration. If you're working remotely or geographically apart, I know it's not virtual reality per se, but we've seen some interesting examples with respect to augmented reality and HoloLens doing that with building cars across geographic boundaries. So talk about being on the same team and talking about a mutual and outcome that everyone wants to happen. There's something very empowering about that. And if you can do that in a meaningful way virtually, then that's a pretty powerful tool. So if we can bring some of those elements maybe from that video game that you were referencing and bring it into that, mash it together with these examples that we are seeing on the AR side and to some extent on the VR side, it sounds like it'd be a very powerful tool for engagement overall.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I want to add a point there. Sorry. One interesting point I want to add to what Emily just said is that I'm looking at it also from the economic gap perspective that I see here. And I think if a virtual space can be created for people to interact and build something, as you suggested, I think it has potential to break economic barriers as well. Because, I mean, like you don't see where you see just that much in the virtual space, right? It gives people a chance to see beyond class barriers that we face, the challenge we face here in schools and in society in general, I think. So
so to your point, do you think these virtual environments reduce bias?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Yeah. It has potential to do that, I think, because I think it makes you, in a virtual space, you can potentially be someone and not be judged for it, right? Because you're in a space with other people. It's almost like you're in a place with like-minded people, regardless of your religion, caste, class, economic background. So I think that it has potential for that, definitely.
And I think, going to that, digging more to that point, I think it also has to do with the point where it becomes addictive, because you have that safety net of not being judged and just being whoever the hell you want. You're acting out your dreams like situation in a virtual place, and it has to do with people want to spend more time on it. Just because I had a different thought. I saw recently, I think it was on Singularity Hub, that there's this company that does real estate that basically they only have one office. I think it's in Seattle, but most of their main office is in BR. So they built this this world in some program, and they go on there and they have their meetings and all these things in BR, in that world. So you have people across people across the world, who are part of the company but not physically in the same location. It's not even Skype or these things. It's in BR, and they have these meetings there. I thought, holy smokes, that's really cool. I mean, now you're having a company in virtual, or a virtual company, basically.
Yeah.
Even more virtual now.
Wow. What's the name of this company?
I don't know. I mean, I don't remember because it's on Singularity Hub. It's one of the recent articles from 2 days ago. So you'll see it there. I'll share with you guys. So I mean, I don't want to take too much time away from you guys. Do you have any parting thoughts?
I'll let you go first, Emily.
Fair enough. I think just to take a step back, we started this conversation around virtual reality and empathy. I definitely think that there is empathy is definitely a mindset, and it can be influenced by VR, which is a tool, but you need certain skills to work that tool in a meaningful way. I think VR has definite potential to be a game changer in this regard, because it is a whole new way to view content and create content, a unique experience in a virtual world that previously wasn't possible. We are just at the beginning of figuring out what this means. There's so many great things that are happening. And I mean, it's a very exciting space for me to cover, frankly, because I get to see this innovation unfold in front of our eyes. And I feel like it's only going to become more significant as we tackle these challenges that we've already talked about, making the experience better, making the headsets thinner and slimmer, building these virtual collaboration spaces, and bringing it more to the masses in a lot of ways, which I think obviously there's been some great work done here already that we've even talked about today.
Cool.
Yeah, I think for me, similar to what Emily just said, I see huge potential in VR and what it can do. And when I conducted the study I did in the school, while I did get feedback about motion sickness and about people not feeling very comfortable, I also saw this fun and enjoyment in the classroom for that 15 minutes that they were wearing the VR headset. I think children were taken away to a different world. And so we use the Google Expeditions app. We use the app of Google Expeditions, and the module I used was the 7 Wonders of the World. And it was really interesting to see the responses, because all these children have studied the 7 Wonders of the World, but they've never really seen it or experienced it. So I think it has huge potential. I think it can create excitement for learning. I think it can change the way people approach education. So I'm coming from an education perspective, so I definitely see huge value. But yes, I really look forward to seeing some of these challenges that we've highlighted in this call. I would love to see how these are overcome by newer and newer discoveries and iterations. And then maybe one day it can be a quality experience.
Unbelievable. Well, thank you so much, guys, for sharing your insights. It's been very, very, enhancing, at least my perspective. Hopefully you guys also had, good chat.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you very much for coordinating. This has been great.
Yes,
Thanks
thank you.
so much, guys. Have a good one.